Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. If we haven't met before, I'm Casey, your AI-generated host here at 2C8.
And I'm AI Sam, really excited to be here with you today, Casey. We are powered by the deep expertise of 2C8's seasoned consultants. Our knowledge is built on years of hands-on experience in process development and modeling, distilled from the insights and successes of hundreds of client projects around the globe. Today, we're diving into a topic that's key to running a smart and structured organization: process mapping.
Exactly. We'll explore what process mapping is, some best practices, and most importantly, the value it brings to your business.
Quick heads up before we begin. If you have any questions as we go, just drop them in the chat. Our team is ready to answer them live. Just make sure you're logged into YouTube so you can post a comment.
All right, Sam, let's start from the top. What does it actually mean when we say a business is process-oriented?
Great place to start. A process-oriented business puts stakeholder needs at the center of how things are done. Instead of just chasing results, the focus is on the how the work flows, who's involved, and what each step looks like.
That's the core of it. It's about building structured workflows that promote efficiency, consistency, and high quality. When processes are well designed, businesses can reduce errors, collaborate better, and adapt faster.
And it's not static. Being process-oriented also means regularly revisiting and refining processes based on evolving stakeholder needs. Without that, you risk developing services that don't really match what people actually need.
Absolutely. Now, some people ask, can we be process-oriented without actually mapping our processes?
Technically, yes, but let me just say that mapping makes a huge difference. When you visualize your processes, you make everything clearer and easier to communicate, both internally and externally.
Totally agree. So let's talk about the benefits. Why is process mapping such a powerful tool?
It all comes down to alignment. Mapping helps create a shared understanding across the organization. Everyone can see what's being done, by whom, how, and why. It gets everyone on the same page.
And let's not forget, it's also a form of quality control. When a process is clearly defined, you can easily detect when something goes off track and why.
Exactly. If something's not working, you can ask, is the process itself flawed? Or is there a training issue? It gives you a solid foundation to reflect, learn, and improve.
So, whether you're scaling up, refining your workflows, or just trying to boost collaboration, process mapping helps you work better and smarter. That's a great overview of the benefits, Sam. I would also add that process mapping really highlights how different processes are connected and interdependent.
Yes, and that's such an important point. It's not just about isolated steps, it's about understanding how everything flows together. Process mapping makes those intersections between processes crystal clear.
And speaking of clarity, another big benefit is how it defines responsibilities. Mapping clearly shows where one role's responsibility ends and the next begins.
Exactly. That handover is often where things fall through the cracks. If it's not clearly defined, it's easy for someone to assume the next person knows what to do, but without confirmation, the process stalls.
That's where we use something called business objects to describe what's being handed over. It helps verify that everything's ready before the next person steps in. It's such a smart way to ensure smooth transitions.
Totally. And let's not forget training. Process mapping is incredibly helpful when onboarding new employees. It gives them a clear picture of how things are done, who does what, and what outcomes are expected.
It's like giving them a map of the business landscape. It speeds up learning and reduces uncertainty. New hires can feel confident navigating tasks and understanding the bigger picture from day one.
And on the flip side, when someone retires or leaves, process mapping helps retain critical knowledge. You're not relying on someone's memory. It's documented, accessible, and sustainable.
Exactly. By mapping out how things are done and by whom, we avoid losing valuable know-how when someone walks out the door.
So now that we've covered the why, let's dig into the how. Casey, are you ready to walk through how to actually map a process?
Absolutely. Let's jump into the steps and tools you need to get started. Whether you're doing it for the first time or just need a refresher, we'll break it down so it's easy to follow. All right, now that we know why we want to map processes, let's talk about how to actually do it. First of all, we always recommend process mapping during workshops to the greatest extent possible. This allows us to include more perspectives as we map. But where do we start? I'd say it's smart to start with the big picture, getting an overview of all the processes in the business. First, we look at what core processes, management processes, and support processes we have. That gives us a foundation to understand how everything fits together.
Well, that makes sense. Do you have a visual example we can take a look at?
I do. Let's jump over to 2C8 apps. Here's a chart that shows a structured view of the different types of processes. You can see how we've separated management processes, core processes, and support processes. It helps answer questions like, how do we plan and follow up on activities? What support do we need? And how do we meet the needs of our main stakeholders?
Right, and those stakeholders could be anyone from customers and clients to patients or citizens, basically anyone directly impacted by the process. Once we've identified the processes, we can start prioritizing. Usually we suggest starting with the processes that are the most resource intensive, get the most complaints, cost a lot, or just the ones that people don't enjoy dealing with.
Exactly. We don't try to map everything at once. It's really about prioritization.
Yes, and if you try to map everything right away, it gets overwhelming fast. You'll see it later in the maintenance of the models too. It's hard to keep everything up to date if you started too wide.
Totally agree. Once we have that big picture view in place, the next step is to start mapping one process at a time. Let's say we're going to map the process conduct recruitment. If that's one of our priorities, the first thing we do is define the input and output of that process. We need to understand the scope. Where does the process begin and what's the desired outcome?
So the input to the process is submitted applications and the output from the process is signed employment contract, right?
Exactly. That helps us define the process's boundaries and what we need to describe in this specific process. We also need to look at related processes. What happens before and after this one? What comes before submitted applications? If I turn on some layers I created here, we can see those connections and what comes before and after this process. It's important to keep that in mind so we understand the context the process sits within. In this example, I've outlined the rest of the objects here to keep the focus on the process conduct recruitment.
So basically, we shouldn't just dive into the details right away. We need to first understand the surrounding context.
Yep, that makes the actual mapping much smoother. If we already know where the process starts and what it should lead to, then it's easier to describe how we get there. We start off by asking ourselves, what activities are performed to achieve this result? Let's break down this process into a more detailed model.
When we break down an object into a new model, we can see that the input and output are automatically placed as the starting and ending points.
Exactly. These are our guiding stars as we start mapping a more detailed process.
And when it comes to actually mapping, we usually talk about 3 different approaches, depending on the goal. First, we have process analysis. That's when we map the entire flow in detail, from input to output. We look for problems, dig into root causes, and try to really understand where things might break down.
That's the most in-depth type, right?
Exactly. Then we have mapping for management systems. Here we're often mapping several processes, but we don't go as deep. It's more about identifying where improvements are needed and building an action plan to follow up on later.
Got it. And the third one?
That's when we're designing a new process from scratch. Sometimes there's no existing process to build on. Maybe it's a new business area, or we want to standardize how people work when everyone does things a bit differently. In that case, we gather best practices and create something completely new.
That's a great breakdown. If we go back to the recruitment example, we can describe the process step by step, each activity that needs to happen to get us to that signed contract. In this example, we have added all activities, and between all the activities, we also have clear inputs and outputs as sub-results that brings value throughout the process.
And for each of those activities, we can also add supporting information. Who is responsible? Which systems are used? Or what rules or requirements apply? We can even attach more detailed documents or guides if needed, or add a more in-depth description to our activities.
Exactly. Now, once we've mapped out the process, the next question is, what happens afterward?
Good question. If we're mapping in 2C8 apps and doing it live during a workshop, then the process is basically complete by the time the workshop ends. There might be a few tweaks needed to clean things up, but otherwise it's ready.
And then we share it with the participants, right?
Yes. That's super important. We can easily publish the models to the web and notify the participants. We can also share it as a report or a document. In the published material, you can choose what information to display. In this example, we've added lists showing all the problems and possibilities we've identified during the session. We've also added a matrix of responsibilities within the processes we created. The participants can navigate in the publication and find all this information, including detailed descriptions, connected documents, and much more.
So, no long delay before participants get to see the results.
Nope, we usually say no more than 2 days. It's all about keeping that momentum going.
That makes sense. One final point, after we've mapped the process and shared it, our work isn't done.
Right? The process shouldn't just sit in a folder somewhere. It needs to be used, reviewed, and improved over time.
Exactly. We want these processes to be living documents, a part of the daily workflow that evolves as the business does.
That's exactly why having clear process ownership is so important. If you haven't assigned who's responsible before you start mapping, it's crucial to do that before finalizing the process. We always recommend avoiding publishing any process that doesn't have a clear owner. Otherwise, it becomes outdated fast. And when one process loses credibility, people start to distrust the whole system.
Totally agree. Actually, let's take a moment to talk about some common pitfalls we've seen during process mapping. One big one? Not having the right people in the room. Sometimes we just miss inviting someone who holds key insights. It's usually not intentional. We just don't realize how vital their input is until we hit a roadblock. When that happens, we either have to skip parts of the mapping or postpone some questions to a later session.
Another issue is having the wrong mix of participants. If it's only managers, the process might look great on paper, but not reflect how things really work. And if it's only operational staff, you often get conflicting opinions and no one to make a final decision. What we're aiming for is a good balance between strategy and hands-on experience.
Also, in groups where there's already a bit of dysfunction, having a manager in the room can make people hold back. In those cases, it might be helpful to split into separate sessions or directly ask questions like, "Do you agree with this?" to draw out quieter voices.
Absolutely. And the people in the workshop really need to translate what they actually do into the mapping discussion. That can be mentally demanding. Sessions that run too long tend to lose focus, so it's usually more effective to break the work into shorter, focused sessions. Around 2 to 3 hours each works best.
Another trap we sometimes fall into is what we call gateway inflation. That's when the map becomes cluttered with every possible scenario, even the rare ones. Sure, it's important to handle necessary decision points, but if we try to capture every exception, the process becomes overwhelming. Stick to mapping the standard process flow and deal with exceptions separately where needed.
Exactly. Keeping the map focused on the preferred flow helps make it actionable. You can still document recurring exceptions, just don't let them take over the main structure.
And then there's the issue of getting too detailed. If one person is doing several tasks in a row without any real handoffs, it's often better to group those into a single activity. You can always add descriptions or supporting documents if more detail is needed.
Right? Let's look at an example where we could merge activities to declutter the process. As you can see here, we have 6 activities with 3 responsible roles. Activities 2, 3, and 4 are performed by the same role. If we delete these activities and gather all 3 steps in one activity, we can shorten the process and make it more readable. We add a more detailed description to this activity to ensure we don't lose any critical information. Of course, this is not suitable for all occasions, but it's a trick to remember when we notice our processes becoming too long. Also, when there is no clear output and value between 2 activities, it usually makes sense to merge them. It keeps the map cleaner and easier to follow.
You're making a really good point, Sam. And one last thing. Some facilitators are hesitant to map live during workshops. They're worried about making mistakes or working too slowly. But honestly, we recommend mapping directly in 2C8 apps as you go. It doesn't have to be perfect in the moment. You can always polish it later. The big benefit is that everyone sees the same thing, which helps align understanding and gets you to results faster.
Exactly. Remember, you probably know more about the tool than anyone else in the room. Don't let perfection slow you down. It's better to capture ideas in real time and refine them afterwards.
Before we wrap this up, I also want to touch up on actually using the process maps we've created. Sam, why do you think it's so important to have a visualized management system, or visualized processes in general, available for employees?
That's a great question, Casey. In my experience, when process maps are shared widely, not just locked away in a cabinet or in a folder somewhere, they become a powerful alignment tool. They help teams understand not only what they should be doing, but why they're doing it. I often say that a process map is like the Google Maps for your work. It shows where you are, where you need to go, and how to get there. But if only one team sees the map, then others might be driving blind.
Exactly. And it's not just about clarity. It's also about empowerment. When employees at all levels can access and understand the processes, they feel more involved in the bigger picture. They're more likely to follow best practices and even suggest improvements.
And there's a cultural benefit too. When you share process maps transparently, you foster a culture of collaboration and continuous improvement. People start seeing processes as something they can influence, not just rules handed down from above.
Right. But I've heard some concerns over too much visibility. Worries about complexity or people misinterpreting the information. What's your take on that?
I get that. But the answer isn't to restrict access, it's to design better process maps. Use simple language, clear visuals, and good categorization. Maybe have different levels of detail for different audiences. Hiding maps is a band-aid. Educating users is the solution.
Well said. So to close things off, if you're not making your process maps available to your whole organization, you're missing out on a big opportunity to align, engage, and improve. Make the maps accessible, and people will navigate change with you, not against you. That's a wrap on today's session. We hope these insights help with your own process mapping. If you've got any questions, just reach out. We've got our email address on screen.
And if you're not using 2CA apps today and want to learn more about how it can support your journey toward better and more structured processes, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll be glad to set up a demo and help identify the best path forward for your organization. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.
Bye, guys.